just wanted to introduce myself. My name is Erica Pellman, and I am the Director of Marketing with the NEVPI. And I'd just like to welcome everyone tonight to our Butcher Block Talk, which is kind of my version of a TED Talk. So tonight's topic is going to be the pandemic pivot. And so I'm just glad that you all took the time out of your evenings tonight to join us. I would love to just have this space to talk about what's currently going on with your businesses, kind of share some information that we have on the checkoff side of things, and just kind of hear from you. This is really your hour to share your stories and kind of collaborate and network. I know that right now it's really hard to meet and go to conferences that we all cherish and enjoy connecting with others in the industry. So just wanted to provide a space for us to talk tonight. So I'm going to share my screen now for the presentation slide, so we can just go over a couple things. All right, so just a couple housekeepings. So the chat will be enabled, and so if you find at the bottom on your chat tool feature, there should be a chat button that you can have visible. Jen will be filtering those questions as she sees them. So if there's anything that you want to ask throughout the chat, just feel free to type that out for you in the message box, and we can get those questions answered. Towards the end, we will allow everybody to use the mic if that's easier for you to just kind of talk amongst us during the roundtable discussion. But as far as during the presentations, to kind of keep things on track, we'll just keep that chat feature open. As I said, ask anything that you would like. Nothing is off the table. And if you could keep your video enabled as long as possible, just kind of makes it a little bit easier when we're discussing, especially face-to-face is so much better than just talking through instant messenger or trying to talk through phone. So share your thoughts, concerns, and let's collaborate and have a very interactive hour and a half. So as I said, my name is Erica Pellman. I'm the Director of Marketing with the NEVPI. And so I just wanted to kind of share a little bit of my background. I've been with the NEVPI now for the last almost a year and a half. And so my background was actually in the Packer world, and I worked for Cargill Meat Solutions, both at the Fort Morgan, Colorado plant, as well as the Hazleton, Pennsylvania plant for a total of 3 years. And so I have the background in the meat processing and thoroughly enjoyed working with those employees and producing and fabricating beef. And since then, I've been with the NEVPI. I now serve under the Director of Marketing role. So I just kind of wanted to take my background in the packing house and kind of wanted to have the breakdown of our talk tonight. And so the first thing that we're going to talk about is looking into change and how are we changing consumers' mindsets right now at the meat case. And we're going to have Dr. Campbell from the Penn State University talk to you guys about our steak swap PDF that the NCBA and the beef checkoff created. And so we're going to go through that, maybe talk about a little bit of some insight as to what you can do with your consumers at the meat case. And then we're going to tap into connecting with our consumers and how are we connecting beyond the brick and mortar, kind of what the markets are doing at retail. And we're going to have that touched on by Rob Hess, and he is the owner and beef producer in Pennsylvania, and he owns the Bow Creek Farms, which is in Hershey, Pennsylvania. So we're so glad that he could join us tonight to give us some of his insight with his retail operation and kind of what he's been doing with e-commerce, which they just launched in December of 2019. And then the third portion of this talk tonight, we're going to go over collaboration and just kind of get a pulse at where we're all currently at, collaborate with one another, and just see kind of what's working for you, what's not working for you, and try to help each other out because we're all in this together. We're all going through the same thing. It's kind of a unique situation for pretty much everyone in the country. And so I just thought it would be really cool to have not just I provide you information, but that you each provide each other some insight into what you're doing, because I know you're all from different sections of the country, different states, and so you might do something different at your operation versus someone else. And the nice thing about this too is I thought about how can we make a negative into a positive. If COVID didn't happen, we wouldn't have this interactive space that we can all collaborate. So I have a varying backgrounds of people that are producers, processors, and so we kind of have a mixture of different backgrounds, which I think is really cool to have to this discussion tonight. So then NEBPI, we're the Northeast Beef Promotion Initiative, and so we cover territory from Maine all the way down to Virginia. And in my role, I cover food service and retailers throughout that entire region and work with them on a multiple faceted program that includes both digital and in-person events. And then my counterparts, Caitlin Swope, who is somewhere on your screen she's below my video, but Caitlin Swope is our Director of Consumer Marketing, and so she's in charge of all of the consumer programs in our Northeast region. And so you'll see her at events like the Penn State football games. She also does some races that sadly were canceled this year, but trying to engage those consumers at events that are really engaging with the health professionals, and as well as consumer events that are really focused on that family mealtime preparation. And then we have Jennifer Orr, who is the Director of Nutrition and Health, and so she works with our retail dietitians. She's always doing something innovative, and she's actually the reason why I decided to do this virtual webinar tonight, because she did one with her retail dietitians and it went really well. She works with her influencers and trying to get dietitians to talk to their clients about putting beef into their diets every day. And so the three of us make up the NEBPI. We're always doing something, and sadly this year it's been a little bit different virtually, but we enjoy the work we do on behalf of beef farmers and ranchers. The reason why we exist is because in our region alone, if you're not sure about this ratio, 14:1, that's the amount of people to cattle in this region. And so there's a large need for representation of the agricultural industry, especially when it comes to how beef is produced, and just trying to get that information about beef disseminated out to consumers. And so 72 million consumers live in our region. The checkoff is funded by $1 from every beef animal throughout its entire life. Every time that animal is bought and sold, $1 of that goes back to the checkoff. We only collect 3% of the checkoff funds, and so we're a region that is in need of educating and promoting beef because there's a lack of agricultural left in the region, but we don't have the funds to do that. And so it's kind of a give and take program, and so we really rely on other states and beef farmers and ranchers across the United States to understand that our program really provides a benefit to the industry as a whole, being that 250,000 consumers live in our region and they really need to know the story about beef. 4 of the top 10 metro cities reside in this area as well, and so we try to really focus in those suburban and metropolitan areas when we do our consumer events, and also trying to make sure we also hit the 5 states that are without a state beef council presence. And so those are going to be your New England states from Maine all the way down to Connecticut and Rhode Island. We really try to focus trying to get there at least once throughout the year to talk to consumers in person. So that's enough about the NEBPI. I want to hear from everyone here tonight, kind of where you're at personally. And I kind of sent an email a couple times, but the worksheet that I sent out, there's a section here. If you don't feel like sharing it right now and you just kind of want to write it down, just think of one word, one emotion, one feeling of kind of where you're at, and whether it's now or later. Maybe we'll share this later when we're all kind of talking face to face. I'd like to do like a self check-in. So if you feel like sharing right now, type in your word in the chat box and Jen will kind of keep track of that for us. And if you can't type it in now, we can share it later throughout our discussion. And I'll just give everybody about a minute to, if you feel like sharing that one word, type it in. And if you want to share it later, like I said, we'll go over that then. And I want to say someone had emailed me earlier, and I wanted to say it was Joni. Joni, I think someone had emailed me, and I can't remember who, but someone had also said overwhelmed. So we'll definitely take note of that. Joni said busy, blessed, optimistic, like some positive words. Thirty more seconds. No one else wants to share? Busy. Second on the busy. All right. Okay. So definitely feeling that there's probably some anxiety with that, maybe positive anxiety that you're just go, go, go all the time. So that's good to hear. I know that I'm resilient. I know that with that being said, the pre-survey that I had sent out, this is kind of where we sat at with the word cloud. So I noticed there's a lot of angst around time and space and communication. And so this is definitely something I want to touch on when we get to our roundtable discussion, and how maybe people with different backgrounds, whether you're a processor or you're a retailer or you're a producer, maybe that's where you can share those pain points where you're currently sitting and kind of figure out how can we find the solution to the problem, because it might not be the way we've done it in the past, but there's always something that we can look to the future, and maybe something that we can always improve upon. So just kind of keep that in the back of your mind as you look at this word cloud, that there's probably something that we're not thinking about, or maybe something has hit you over the last 6 months of something that you want to improve upon in your business, and maybe this what was once a curse is maybe a blessing, to kind of slow down in your business and kind of think about how you can reevaluate everything. So I just wanted to share that with everybody. All right, and so Dr. Kimball and I were talking prior to the call, and so I just wanted to touch on a couple of these facts here before we go into his talk, but just wanted to show you the data compared to the rest of the country of where the Northeast sits. And right now, I mean, we're all seeing it. The prices are going up with food shortages, and the concerns at the packing plants in the beginning were the top of the fears and worries and concerns. But as we are seeing the plants coming back online, that's kind of slowly becoming not an issue at the larger level of retail. But a lot more folks are planning to cook at home. So that's something that is a positive, especially for retailers, because before, where we saw a market that was 50-50 split between food service and retail, those folks that never had cooked in their life are starting to cook again. Stocking up behavior, we did see that there was a 58% of stocking up. So a lot of those folks were stocking up on chicken, but they were also stocking up on ground beef and steaks. And that was around 55% and 30% both equally. And looking at the US, the overall US had seen an increase across the board, but higher in loin sales, while the Northeast saw a higher in round sales, which was kind of surprising, given that we were looking at this in the last 12 weeks, and that was ending in June, which is right around the grilling season. So, and then weekly consumption, we did see a consumption increase, but both between the Northeast and the US increase in beef. Not too much of a drastic increase, but still a good increase that we like to see year over year, both sitting around 70%. And then I'm sure most of you know, but there is a slight, if not moderate, uptick in both butcher shop and online ordering at this point. Folks are trying to go local, especially when they saw that the large retailers weren't able to keep up with the demand, and everyone panic buying, and so they're finding their local retailers, as well as trying to find that online option so they don't have to meet in person, and trying to get their products that way, or even having them delivered to their home. So ground beef, was a little surprising, but not too much surprising for the Northeast. But there was a larger increase in beef steaks comparative to the United States. So at this point, I would like to pass this off to Dr. Campbell, who is going to talk to you tonight about our operational mind shift. And so he'll touch upon, like I stated, the steak swap PDF file that I had sent to you. Sorry if it's getting cut off with my background. But if you want to get those out, that way you'll have a visual reference to look at. And like I said, Dr. Jonathan Campbell is from the Pennsylvania University, and he is the Associate Professor of Meat Science there. And so he is going to take this away. Dr. Campbell?
Thanks, Erica. Welcome, everybody. Hopefully, everybody can hear me okay and got a copy of the PDF that we're going to cover. Erica made this easy for me because I was lazy and did not create an entire slide set to go through. Because being a tenured professor, I should be able to talk to you all for the next hour and a half with only one slide, and I'll do my best. Just kidding. I need to save time for Rob, and then more importantly, hear from you as our base of why we're here tonight, and just kind of have that opportunity to have an open roundtable discussion. I've hosted several of these since the pandemic started in March with our industry, and they've been received pretty well. Just peer-to-peer learning and having discussions. Maybe perhaps doesn't take away from some of you that may feel overwhelmed in this scenario, but certainly should recognize that you are not alone. The pandemic has brought about a lot of challenges, especially with what I would refer to as some minor inaccuracies in media stories that come out on a pretty regular basis, not as regular in the late summer as they were in late spring, early summer. Certainly the Midwest had a much larger impact, especially in the pork industry, when compared to what happened in Pennsylvania and the entire Northeast. We are blessed here in Pennsylvania to have multiple large facilities, as well as a plethora of small and very small processors. I get asked all the time, can I please have a list of all the processors that are near me? And that is impossible for many reasons, although we have tried our best to begin with multiple lists to be able to create some of that, and we're even mapping it to hopefully have a nice graphic to share. And once we get that project completed, I'll definitely be sharing it with Erica and the folks at the Pennsylvania Beef Council, and they can do with that information what they want, but certainly share it with folks like yourselves that are on the call tonight. So again, we appreciate your time and the opportunity to share with you. If there's a burning question that cannot wait until our discussions at the end, if you can enter that into the chat box there, please let us know. We'll try to stop and address it then. I am actually going to reference a document with some of the cuts and fancy muscle names that us scientists like to use as we go through this document. And if you want a copy of what I'm actually referencing, I can provide that to Erica. And even if you don't want it, I'm going to provide it to her. But if you do want it, if you just want to send her a quick note saying, can you please send me the document that Dr. Campbell was referencing with regard to our steak swap. So the first steak and potentially popular for a lot of individuals is our tenderloin steak. So that filet mignon, which is really a fanciful name, is quite popular, mainly because it's pretty consistent most of the time. It's really hard to mess up, even for those people that like to ruin beef and cook it more than a medium temperature. No offense to anybody on the call that likes that type of beef, but you're really not giving us a fair chance when you tend to overcook that beef product. So tenderloin steak, obviously the most tender muscle in the beef animal, but they're what NCBA has created here and put out back in May, early part of the summer, late spring time frame is the strip steak. And one of the reasons for doing that, we put a program on a couple falls ago, talking about direct marketing of livestock. And it was interesting to note that with the exception of tenderloin and ribeye, New York strip as a, or strip loin steak, whichever you want to call it, top loin steak, or if you're west of the Mississippi, lovingly, a Kansas City strip steak. I'm sure there are other fanciful names that we can refer to this, and that's really what causes a lot of confusion in the marketplace with fanciful namings of cuts that goes on. So when somebody visits a meat processor, say in the Midwest, and they visit another one on the East Coast, those terminologies may be very different. So we're conscious of that and always trying to be aware of what those fanciful names are and having a good understanding of where those cuts come from on the animal. I would offer there's some potential steaks missing on the steak swap. One of the primary reasons that the strip steak was put in there, especially on the Northeast, is that is one of the most common. It's actually strip steak or New York strip steak, whichever name you prefer, is purchased more frequently in the Northeast than anywhere else in the country. Other places in the United States prefer ribeye over New York strip. So it's quite fitting that this steak actually be placed as a swap for tenderloin steak. One of the reasons that it's a replacement for tenderloin steak is not due to necessarily the tenderness of that product, because there are major differences as we look at tenderness, and especially objective tenderness or instrumental tenderness as we would measure in a laboratory, but mainly because of the leanness there. And that's why that's really put out as a swap for this product from not only a high quality steak, but also as a comparative nutritional value. Certainly there are other steaks that could be swapped for this in the meat case. I was disappointed with the number of media storms that hit, really damning what I would say they termed as lack of resiliency in our business. And I had to chuckle at all the times that happened, because of all the small and very small processors I know in our state and our region, and that come to visit us on a yearly basis as part of our Pennsylvania Association of Meat Processors annual convention. Those are some of the hardest working, most resilient individuals I know. And I know all the producers on the call, like Rob and others that are not only embracing what's happening here. Yes, certainly you're all are busy, but if anybody can be resilient to this, as well as our ag sector, and we will get through this and rise above it. So I appreciate the hard work that all of you are doing to supply not only the livestock that we enjoy, but also the fresh meat products and processed meat products that you produce. So thank you very much. From a tenderness standpoint, though, on the tenderloin steak side, certainly that cap that is on the ribeye steak. It's ribeye steak runs from about the 6th rib through the 12th rib, but that cap muscle or spinalis dorsi muscle, not to get too Latin or technical with you folks tonight, but that muscle specifically is one of the in the top 2 or 3 on the rankingness of tenderness in the beef animal, and that's really regardless of age. And the reason when we think about tenderloin steak being so tender is because that muscle really serves no purpose with regard to locomotion. It is a support muscle on the inside of the animal's lower back there, along those lumbar vertebrae, and even extending into the sirloin region of the lower back of that beef animal. So it's really, as a means of locomotion, it's really a vestigial or useless muscle in that regard. And because of that, it would be ranked number 1 on the tenderness scale. But from other tenderness standpoints, that top portion or cap of the ribeye, if you look at the second picture below the tenderloin steak, just below that heavy seam fat or intermuscular fat to the lower left of the picture, wrapping around the entire steak, that is the portion of that steak that I'm talking about. And that's really depending on which reference you look at, the second or third most tender muscle. One of my favorite steak, it's actually the best steak I've ever had in a restaurant. I usually hate eating out a steak in a restaurant, maybe because I am too narcissistic and believe I can do it better. That's probably not true, but at the same time, I also know what it really costs, which bothers me a lot as a consumer. So all joking aside, that would be a great way if you are looking at a way to extend the number of steaks in your display case or the number of steaks that you direct market, if that's what you are doing. Really look at some of the educational material that the Beef Checkoff has funded with what started originally as what's known as the Beef Innovations Group and the Beef Alternative Merchandising Program that was put together. The way that ribeye, the whole boneless ribeye is taken apart, adds so many more steaks to the case. Not only are they nice portion size, but the variety and quality of those steaks is fantastic. So I would argue another good replacement for that tenderloin steak would be that ribeye cap steak. Also, on that high tenderness ranking would be that flat iron steak or the infraspinatus muscle there. That's going to, again, depending on which reference you look at, would definitely be in the top 3 to 5 as we look at not only consumer panel testing for tenderness, but as well as instrument or objective measurement to put a what we call shear force measurement number on tenderness, okay? And the way that machine works, for those of you that aren't familiar with shear force, is basically a device that measures the weight or force depending on which unit of measure you're looking at. Sometimes this is measured in pounds, sometimes it's measured in kilograms, sometimes it's even measured with a unit of measure that we are all lovingly familiar with called the Newton. And I'm joking there because even I don't work in that unit of measure very often unless we're doing something specific for a research paper. So if you report to consumers something that is written in newtons, you may lose them. So keep in mind wherever your reference is from if you're looking for information to talk to consumers or potential customers, as it were. So that flat iron steak would also, from a tenderness perspective, certainly the cap steak and the flat iron steak have a lot more marbling than the tenderloin steak. So from a nutritional value, I don't begin to even consider myself to be a nutritionist, but I know enough biochemistry to be dangerous. And the lipid component of both the cap steak as well as the flat iron steak are much higher than the strip loin steak or the tenderloin steak. So those would be fantastic swaps and a way to really increase the number of steaks that you're getting into your meat case, or again, that you may be direct marketing to your consumers. Likewise, cutting that strip loin or top loin in half lengthwise, although it breaks my heart as a hardcore meat scientist to do that, it certainly adds value to our display cases in a much nicer portion size, as it were, especially targeting a specific audience, those people that maybe want that tenderloin steak. You could take that strip steak and just simply by how it is cut, cutting it lengthwise in half and having an upper portion of that strip loin steak and a bottom portion really mimics the size of what that tenderloin steak would be, as well as the leanness of that. Now, having said that, if you've ever cut a strip loin or looked closely at certain strip loin steaks in a display case, when you get to the last 2 or 3 towards the tail of that animal, you start to have the sirloin muscle or gluteus medius muscle, little football-shaped muscle kind of in the bottom corner. For people that do not like strip steaks or T-bone steaks, as it were, that would be the reason why they don't. Because that muscle, compared to the tenderness of what we refer to as the longissimus muscle, is light years difference. And if you look at that from a number perspective, we consider anything, now I'm talking in kilograms. I can put it in pounds for you, but most of the literature is written in kilograms. Anything really with a score less than 4, we consider to be tender or very tender. And just for the record, I know none of you sell or market tough beef in the United States. We only have more tender or less tender. So anything greater than a score of 4 on 4 kilograms of force to cut across that muscle fiber is considered to be less tender. Somewhere around the 4 to 4.5 to 5 is what we would consider to be moderate on the tenderness. And we'll go through some of that as we go through a lot of the steaks. Certainly the ribeye is very difficult to swap straight out. The marbling and flavor attributes associated with a ribeye steak are very difficult to mimic and replace. However, I agree 100% with this sheet that was created. The chuck eye steak, by far a more popular steak for me personally, because that spinalis dorsi or cap muscle, as well as the complexus muscle, are far more tender than is that main muscle of the ribeye, that longissimus muscle. And in fact, as you look towards the shoulder end of that ribeye, that longissimus muscle, it tends to be less tender than it does as you move closer to, say, ribs 10, 11, or 12. However, the chuck eye steak not only has, in my opinion, a much better flavor compared to a ribeye steak, but again, the tenderness component seems to be perceived much higher because that cap muscle or spinalis muscle, as well as the smaller round muscle there, this complexus muscle, add a tenderness component that are in fact enhanced compared to a ribeye steak. So you often wonder, well, why in the world is that? Why would that be cheaper in a retail setting than a ribeye steak? And that simply goes back to simple economics of supply and demand. Whether you refer to a ribeye steak as a Delmonico or a ribeye steak or a rib steak, numerous names, and then the name I love to hate, the tomahawk ribeye. Certainly it's fancy and it sounds cool. It's good marketing, but the tenderness of where that comes from is quite different as we move across. Certainly the strip loin steak could be used as a replacement, but again, look at some of the beef alternative merchandising. There are numerous YouTube videos that the Beef Checkoff has funded. Carrie Underley has done a fantastic job with showcasing a lot of this. Certainly there are bad videos that are on YouTube. There are decent videos from educational standpoint, but most of the ones that the Beef Checkoff has funded that are readily available and free that are on YouTube, if you are like me and tend to watch more YouTube than regular TV simply because it's more enlightening and less depressing, that could be an option for you to maybe educate yourself on what some of those beef alternative merchandising processes are, because it really doesn't add a whole lot of time, as it were, but it certainly adds a lot more value and number of steaks in your display case or in your offerings that you're packaging. So the T-bone steak is basically a combination of the strip loin steak on one side of the vertebrae with a piece of that tenderloin or psoas major muscle on the other side. And I get asked this all the time. What's the difference between a T-bone and a porterhouse? And really, there's no true standard of identity difference. But if you would ask the majority of meat processors, shelves alike, the only difference is that really that size of that tenderloin muscle. So this is all coming from the same primal and subprimal. And it's almost impossible to say that if you don't have enough T-bones that you can actually replace them with either a porterhouse or a strip steak in the display case. So this is one of those that is really hard and almost impossible to do. Certainly that bone is going to add flavor, but if you happen to have bone-in ribeyes, which is an oxymoron term because the term ribeye means boneless. So a bone-in ribeye is really should be referred to as a rib steak. With that bone on it is going to perhaps add an additional flavor component to that. But the whole reason in buying something from the strip loin is again the fact that it is lean, and that T-bone or porterhouse has a great tenderness component with that piece of tenderloin steak that is on there. So we haven't talked a lot about the top sirloin, and one of the reasons that we haven't is because the lack of tenderness in that top sirloin. Certainly they are great steaks, but when compared to a lot of the ones that we have above the strip steak, is really not a fair replacement or a swap. Certainly it would be better than something like a round steak, perhaps, which is any of those muscles more heavily involved in locomotion, but definitely not a fair replacement in that regard. So strip steaks, again, people are going to buy a strip steak for a specific reason. And if it's leanness, perhaps that top sirloin steak, especially the cap, or another name for that might be a culotte steak, C-O-U-L-L-E-T-E. And that culotte steak is in fact a lot more tender than that main sirloin steak. It's actually very tough if you just cut a top sirloin or a top sirloin butt without removing that cap first. Why? Because one of the ways to maximize tenderness, and one of the best ways, is to make sure you're cutting across that muscle fiber. And if you just simply slice a top sirloin butt straight across with what you think the muscle grain is with the predominant sirloin muscle, or that gluteus medius muscle, you're actually slicing parallel to the muscle fibers in that cap or culotte there. And it's actually a very tender, nice piece of beef. But when you slice parallel to those muscle fibers, when someone eats a top sirloin steak with that left on there, that portion of that steak, and to some degree, especially in a medium well done temperature ranges, are almost unacceptable from a tenderness perspective. So really be mindful in how you're breaking some of those subprimals down and what you're offering there. Certainly you're not only going to add more steaks in that case, but again, you're maximizing tenderness of that subprimal itself and of that top sirloin. Certainly another option to strip steak could be a tri-tip. Tri-tip is actually out of the bottom sirloin, but can be challenging to cook and cut. Fantastic beef flavor, nice leanness from a muscle perspective. This is your $20 word for the night. That muscle name, if you remember, practice it, say it 10 times in the mirror before you go to bed. Tensor fascia latae muscle, tri-tip. It looks like a triangle or a boomerang. It actually has 3 muscle grains. So you have to be very mindful about how you go about slicing that. So not only do we want to slice across that muscle grain, to maximize tenderness for that particular cut, you want to be on about a 45-degree bias with your knife. So not only perpendicular to a cutting table or cutting board, but about 45 degrees as you slice across that muscle grain. That'll really help in maximizing the tenderness of a cut like that. So a lot of people think it's the cap of that top sirloin is a tri-tip, and although they might look similar, it's not. It's actually out of the bottom part of the sirloin. Part of the tail of the tri-tip is actually on the round, so that has to be removed correctly if you are dealing with carcass beef. So take that into consideration. Certainly, we haven't talked about a lot of the shoulder cuts and replacements that can happen out of like the what I would consider to be a fantastic portion, the chuck roll there. Not only are you going to get some boneless chuck eye steaks, but a lot of those Denver cut steaks, they are fantastic from not only a flavor standpoint, they would be also another great replacement for replacing ribeye. And then really you can almost replace sirloin with anything. That ranch steak that you see there, flat iron steak, flat iron is to me a grading up of a replacement for that top sirloin steak. The flat iron steak, depending on which side of the bone that flat iron was on, some consumers may find that unacceptable or have almost a aroma of liver or organ meat, and that's simply an effect of being next to the bone there. So you have a top side of that muscle, and then the bottom side that lays across the paddle bone or scapula bone, shoulder blade there, whatever you prefer to call it. And that bottom piece can taste differently than the top piece, but certainly it is fantastic from a tenderness standpoint. And all the numbers that I'm quoting from a tenderness standpoint, again, I will provide that ranking of beef muscle tenderness to Erica, and she can send it out if you send her an email and request that. So where does the ranch steak come from? The ranch steak actually comes from the shoulder clod or the arm portion there of the shoulder. And that is really the triceps muscle, okay? So that large muscle there sliced across and about 3/4 of an inch across the grain, they're not quite as tender as a sirloin steak, but certainly they would be a good replacement if you are looking for a way to build more steaks in your display case or offerings as you direct market. There is an example there of the culotte steak. And again, I think it's a fantastic steak from a tenderness standpoint. To me, it's not a replacement to the top sirloin steak because it is part of the top sirloin steak. You're really adding value there. And then that petite sirloin, again, is also part of that top sirloin, as it were. So they're just really smaller portion size if you want to increase value. And instead of slicing whole top sirloin steaks, really take a little bit more time, take those seams apart, connecting those different muscles, and you're going to add a lot of value in your display case as it goes through. So with that, I think we've covered enough topics. I think I talked for almost 30 minutes on just one slide, and I think we can, Erica, if there aren't any burning questions to answer right now, we can move on to Rob's discussion. So,
okay. I think there was one thing on the chat, and Rob had just asked, where do you encounter the nerves in the strip loin? Oh, you're on mute, Dr. Campbell.
Sorry. Yeah, I just caught that. What was, let me see the chat. Where do
you encounter the nerves in the strip loin?
The nerves in the strip loin.
Did you want to clarify that, Rob?
Yeah, you want to clarify that?
Sometimes when you're looking at strip steaks, you'll occasionally see an ugly one that has what I wasn't sure what it is. Is it a nerve or a line, a tough area in a strip steak? What is that? And is it from a certain portion of the muscle?
Yeah. So there are a couple different muscles on that strip steak. Multifidus being one of them. There's part of that longissimus lumborum, but the main one is where, as you get towards that hip loin juncture, where the hip component comes in there, you have at least 2 to 2.5 steaks, depending on how thick you cut your steaks. Perhaps if you cut really thin steaks, 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch, you might have 4 or 5 steaks. But towards the tail of that animal is where that gluteus muscle comes in, and that line you're referring to, I guess if you look at a strip loin from those and you take that, cover that little piece up, that line almost makes in my opinion, and excuse the analogy, almost makes a strip loin look like South America, or the shape of South America. And that line is actually separating a muscle seam, and it's very tough. Again, I guess I kind of lied. I told you guys we don't sell tough meat in the United States, so it is on the very not tender side. I guess I could put it that way as try to explain it, but that's not a nerve. That's actually a muscle seam that runs through there. And it, like I said, as you get towards the probably the last few steaks that you're going to cut off that strip loin, it's almost a solid line that separates that gluteus muscle from the longissimus muscle. Good question.
All right, thank you.
All right. And with that, Rob, I'm going to kick it off to you. Rob is actually a beef producer from Pennsylvania, and he is the owner and operator of Bow Creek Farms, which is in Hershey, Pennsylvania. And so, Rob, it's all on you.
Well, I definitely won't be able to talk for 30 minutes like a tenured professor, but I'll make a stab at least telling you what we do here at Bow Creek Farm. My wife Amy and I operate Bow Creek Farm, and we've been direct marketing meat since approximately 2012. In 2012, we had the idea of approaching a local hotel, the Hotel Hershey, with seeing if they'd have an interest in sourcing local meat. And that first year, we did sell them 15 animals, and they were very happy with the product. And the following year, we moved up to about 37 animals for 2013. In 2014, we also added the Hollywood Casino, which is a similar type venue with multiple restaurants. And at that same time, we were sending them whole animals as well. And I guess at that point, after 2014, we started to grow concerned that we had too many eggs in 2 baskets. And we were worried that if we'd lose one or both of those facilities, we would have an issue. So we decided to attempt to diversify. We started planning for an on-farm store. Then sure enough, before we even had the on-farm store open, that we lost the executive chef at Hollywood Casino, and we did lose that business, which later that year forced us to get the on-farm store operating. And fortunately for us, it was the smaller of our larger clients. But we started the on-farm store, and it was a relatively simple process with the state inspection through the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture. And so once we had the on-farm store operating in 2018, the first year we've only added approximately $40,000 in retail sales. So at that point, we thought, since we had the infrastructure in place and we had the product, we began to examine doing online retail. And I guess what really forced us to accelerate that process was in 2019, the executive chef from the Hotel Hershey left, and we lost approximately 40% of that business. So then at the tail end of 2019, we actually had the online store operating, but to be fair, we really had no idea. We had the product, we knew that, but we didn't know anything about online retail, and it's been a lot of trial and error. And to be honest, until COVID, online retail was extremely slow. And even now, online sales only represent approximately 10% of our sales. In-store sales this year have represented approximately 70% of our sales, and our wholesale business this year remains at about 20% of our sales. I think it's when people start to consider doing online retail, it's certainly something I would encourage people to do to diversify their business. But from our standpoint, we've encountered a lot of things that we didn't necessarily think were going to be as great an issue as what they've proven to be, such as managing the inventory. And some of the inventory management issues have been a product of COVID. I'm not sure we would have had these issues if it hadn't been the extreme demand that we've had this past spring. But I guess one of the issues that Amy and I have encountered is you have to have consistency, probably not only in the animals themselves, but also you have to have consistency from the processor if you intend to market the cuts by the piece rather than by the pound. So if you look at, in most online scenarios, I believe the vast majority of them would be selling the cut by the piece. So you're really looking at, a filet mignon where it has to meet parameters of 6 to 8 ounce. And I think if there's other people like me on the call, I know Caitlin is, when you receive fillets back from the processor, you're going to have a very wide range of sizes of those fillets. You're going to be down to a quarter of a pound, all the way up to, depending how long you're cutting them, maybe up to 12 or 14 ounce. So in the beginning, that's why we've done multiple sizes on several cuts. And to be fair, we are sold out of a huge number of the premium steaks. But again, most of that has come from our on-farm store, not necessarily online. And to be fair, I don't know how online sales would have continued if we hadn't ran out of inventory. A couple other aspects of online retail that we didn't expect to maybe be to affect us to the magnitude it does is it's very time consuming. When you sell one package online, it is far more time consuming to process that order and package that order and ship the order versus someone showing up at your store and swiping a credit card and leaving with a product. Again, I would encourage, we're going to continue to pursue it because truthfully, I think we'll move past COVID at some point. And I think that online will be more important to us than it is right now. But at this point, we are so busy in store, and we have felt it was more important to take care of our local customers rather than worrying about expanding geographically. A couple other things that I would mention is if you're a producer or someone who is considering doing this, and you look at our prices online, you will initially think that is ridiculous. Who would ever pay that price for that piece of beef? And I can't argue with that. But what I can tell you is that every order we get, from the time you receive that order, package the meat, tape it up, weigh it, go in, print a label, have UPS show up and pick it up, you're going to have we have nearly an hour's labor per package. In our particular case, we're not using dry ice. We're using an ice blanket that we actually source from a company in Pennsylvania. And that ice blanket has to be hydrated and frozen in our walk-in freezer. That does a couple things for us. It's more difficult for us to store dry ice. We would have to pick it up with more regularity. This removes a lot of that labor of having to get dry ice with more regularity. And it also, I believe, I don't remember the details at this point, but it removes some of the issues associated with air travel and dry ice. I believe there was stipulations with dry ice with respect to how, if it can be delivered next day air and things like that. Some other issues that we've encountered is specific to COVID. There has been, prior to the current situation, we had no issues with UPS and delivery. Since COVID has evolved, UPS has been overwhelmed. They're busier than the Christmas season, and we've had several packages that didn't get delivered until the meat was ruined, and we ended up having to replace that product. Whereas, you know, I guess it's just a cost of doing business. We can have insurance on that, but it hasn't been worth it. That being said, we don't send maybe a huge number of packages online, but we do send a lot of high dollar packages. So oftentimes we try to make sure that those, we pack them for additional days. So if we expect the delivery to take 1 day, we generally pack them for 2. I think overall, in my notes, I think it was a positive for us to do the online. The only thing, it will give us a greater geographic range, where we were concerned previously we could only reach people, you know, within a certain number of miles of our farm store in Hershey, Pennsylvania. And we certainly, like everybody else, were not anticipating COVID. But given as busy as we've been here, it's kind of limited what we could do online because we've been so low on inventory online. And that's about everything that I had, Erica. I assumed that people would probably have questions if there were people that were interested in attempting this sort of thing.
Does anyone at this point have any questions for Rob that he could answer right now?
I did see in some of the chat, someone mentioned about $28 for tenderloin in store, and we are actually $27 for tenderloin in store, and we are currently processing 4 to 6 animals per month, and we are sold out of tenderloin. We have a waiting list that's at least a month long at that $27 a pound in store.
Shelly also asked, what platform are you using with your website?
It's WooCommerce. Yes, it's funny you contrast that with if you think about our supply chain, what's really hurt our supply chain is the fact that pre-COVID and predominantly currently, Americans were eating about several meals per week out of the household. So 60 to 70% of all of the beef produced in the United States was going either to food service or export. And that didn't go away. That had to go somewhere. Certainly you saw some large plants close, but not nearly the significant time frame and impact that pork plants did. Closer to home, we had our Case Ready plant, the Cargill plant in Hazleton was closed for several weeks. Our JBS plant was closed for about 10 days. And that caused some headaches for contract growers. But there was still a plethora of product going into cold storage every single day. And as a result, at least in central Pennsylvania, what we saw was things like USDA prime grade whole briskets flooding the marketplace, beef tenderloin with a shopper card in a lot of our retail outlets at least here in State College, was they were selling it for less than I could buy at wholesale, somewhere around $6.99 a pound, which is insane. And that shows you the degree, if you really think about that, that showed, and they weren't losing money on it, I guarantee you. That shows you the degree of backlog of what some of these cold storage places had, that aren't getting to Texas Roadhouse. They aren't getting to chain steakhouses. And a lot of those places have a mandatory 21-day storage contract with these cold storage facilities. So you had weeks of inventory that had to be offloaded. So it's great that someone like Rob in his store and others of you that may be on the call can really add value to the story that you have to sell and how you market your product. So congratulations, man. That's fantastic.
And Dr. Campbell, the one thing that's interesting too is I think that I haven't been following what's going on in other states, but fortunately I still sell, a fair amount of meat to the Hotel Hershey, which is obviously upscale dining with multiple restaurants in probably arguably the busiest tourist location, supposed to be the busiest tourist location in Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
And they are currently limited to 25% capacity. So even now, there has to be, unless other states are far more open than I'm aware of, there still has to be a huge number of those premium steaks that aren't making it to their final destination.
Yes, that's 100% correct. There was something in the chat that I missed that talked about the Terrace Major, or it's also called the Petite Tender, from being very popular in Massachusetts. Again, that is something that also took off. It would be a good replacement from a lean perspective. The problem with the biggest problem with the Petite Tender, in my opinion, is how quickly it dries out on the grill or very high heat or searing scenario. So what a lot of individuals do, they'll actually cut that into smaller medallions, marinate it, and add value to it that way, or simply wrap the whole thing in. Eric, am I allowed to say bacon on this call? I mean,
yeah, you can say bacon. We wrap it in bacon.
Simply to keep it from drying out, because it's so lean and such a delicate muscle, it will dry out very quickly on the grill. So some consumers may find that disheartening to see what the finished product might look like. But if you take good care in how you take care of that Terrace Major or Petite Tender out of the shoulder, it is a fantastic, and again, probably on the top 5 or 6 on tenderness scale when you look at that. So great point.
Awesome.
Why don't you quit sharing and we can have, there you go.
There we go. The fun part. So this is where I would like everybody, if you feel comfortable enough, you don't have to use the chat feature at this point. I think we're all pretty comfortable with just speaking with our mics. So if you have anything that you would like to bring to the floor, now is the time to do that. Otherwise, I'm going to treat this like school and just randomly pick someone, and I'm going to ask you a question. And then from there, the person that I pick, you will then pick someone else to then ask the similar question, or I can provide you another question. So, Shelly, since you joined last, I thought I would have you go first. Shelly, what are you currently hearing from your customers, and are you facing any challenges? And if so, kind of what are they?
Probably the biggest challenge we have is with processing. We sell at farmers market, and I sell online in the Pittsburgh area. And so what we have for beef has to be USDA processed. So I've been fortunate that I was able to get some dates, but that's something that's definitely of concern. And storage as well. It's like, I don't want to give up a date because my freezers are full, because I just don't know when I'll get another one. So, that's been a big challenge. Other than that, it was crazy in the spring and things kind of leveled off later on. other challenges though. The reason why I asked about the platform is that one of the huge issues for selling online is, you know, do you sell by the pound, and how do you do that and manage it with it being not too complicated time wise. So I've been using Shopify and use ranges on our website, and it works okay, but there's definitely some complications with that. So I don't know, did I answer everything?
Oh yeah, we just wanted to have you share kind of your story, what you're going through, and you are more than welcome to pick the next victim. Or
Can I ask Shelly a question?
What's that?
Can I ask Shelly a question, Erica?
oh yeah,
Well,
yeah.
you're next, Jonathan. So go ahead.
Shelly, how many? So Rob, you said you do 4 a week, roughly.
Yes, normally.
How many, Shelly? How many animals you guys do in a week or a month? Or
Jonathan, I'm sorry, we're doing 4 to 6 per month.
okay, okay.
Yeah.
So
Usually we're beginning farmers, so we're just in this is year 6 of actually selling online. So we've been, you know, working to scale up, and we do birth to harvest. So with that said, we've been increasing every year. Last year, I think it was 7 for the year. So this year, I'm trying to think how many I did do. I think we're up to 10.
yeah, and I hate to even bring this up because certainly you're not alone in finding those processors, but Rob has he's doing in a month what you almost did last year. So having said that, he's feeding a ton of animals compared to what you're doing. So it's easier for him to have an easier conversation and impact consistency with that meat processor. I think one thing that people forget is as we as meat processors don't communicate well with producers and vice versa. One of the biggest bottlenecks that happens in the small butcher shops is the demand that carcass space takes up. So killing an animal and getting that into a carcass form is actually the easiest part of that whole process. When you have, let's say Shelly wanted hers aged, she did the literature, she knows what she's talking about. She wants her to age 3 weeks. And Rob's a pain in the butt, and he wants his age 6 weeks. That means that processor needs to have the cooler space for however many head they do in a week for that 6 week period. And that's a 20-acre field sometimes. So the reason that some of the other bottlenecks don't happen in say medium to large processors is because they're processing that carcass as soon as it gets to a temperature. Now I understand the reason why you'd want to be able to try to add some value with quote that aging time, but that really ties up the space component to get that carcass fabricated and back to you. So
I haven't asked for that. I just do whatever, you know, whatever they do. You know, it's nice to have it aged, but
yeah.
You know, I mean, I'm not putting any specific demands. I mean, I try to do the best I can to accommodate the processor, and I'm willing to pay whatever I need to pay for them to be able to do the job and be financially sustainable.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, whenever you're a smaller processor or a smaller producer, you know, we're not as big a chunk of change coming into their pocket. And it's like, I'm afraid to ask for anything. I'm afraid to ask for anything. I wouldn't even dare ask for anything special because, you know, it's like, I'm thankful that I have a date.
Yeah. And I appreciate where you're coming from with that, but I think that conversation has to be had. And I think you're better off not putting that demand of aging on there because it adds complexity to the conversation. But hey, I'll pay you more per pound for processing for, cutting flat irons or something like that. That's a different conversation because you need to still be able to meet what your consumers are wanting from your direct marketing, just so it makes it work for you. So
I think, like with the direct marketing, I mean, what I've found now, you got to remember, I'm in year 3 of a value-added producer grant for marketing.
okay.
So we had a $15,000, grant, which, with my match is, considerably more money. So, with that said, going through a lot of the marketing and that what I've discovered with it is that as long as we convey what the added value is that we're bringing to the table and we know what pain point we're solving for our customers, that at that point in time, price isn't a challenge. It's relative to a degree, but solving the pain point and producing that value is more important. So for customers who want to know and they want to have confidence in who they're getting their product from, they are not price conscious like somebody who's going into Aldi's and shopping for the cheapest price.
Agreed.
It's not the same thing. So I guess the question is, who is your customer? Who are we trying to reach? Are we trying to feed the world, or are we trying to feed our community and to have an impact and for people to be regionally sustainable in our food?
Yeah, and again, are you paying yourself for your time? Rob talked about the time it took to put those online orders together versus scanning a steak in his retail shop. Same goes to meat processors. Are you guys pricing yourself because of your competitor in the next county has it a certain price, or are you really factoring how much it costs you with your time and truly paying yourself? Because if you're not, you're disadvantaging yourself and the consumer. When you finally realize that point, you're either going to go out of business or you're going to have a drastic price increase the next time they buy something. So I would encourage all of you to really look at what the true cost with your time involved. Every time you make a trip take cattle somewhere, every time you move them to a different pasture, every time you buy a piece of equipment, every time you do something in that business, pack up a box of steaks to ship, pay for the shipping, all of that needs to be taken into consideration. Otherwise, you're losing money.
I know that there's some processors on the call right now. Is there any kind of input that you would like to add to the conversation, to kind of add to what Shelley, maybe William or Dustin?
Yes, I'd like to speak up.
Go ahead, Bill.
How you doing, Jonathan?
Fantastic, sir.
Jonathan, your discussion about the strip steak there, I find that quite interesting because, I mean, you've been at my market. I have a retail market, and I do sell more strip steaks than ribeyes in this area. And some of the definitions you were giving there was very helpful. And your descriptions on some of the steaks was very interesting. But I guess one of my main concerns, once we got into this virus, March, April, May, of course, the major processors, I buy box beef, and they started closing down. Now, I don't know if it was gouging going on, but some of the pricing was just kind of ridiculous, I thought.
Yeah.
Do you think the processing plants are better equipped to handle this if it breaks again in the winter?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would like to think we've learned a lot as an industry as a whole. Certainly the amount of dollars that have gone into beyond just PPE, separating people on the line, addressing their social habits. The sadly, one of the headlines that hit, especially the eastern side of the state, in Pennsylvania specifically, the CDC puts out a document every week called Morbidity and Mortality Weekly. And one of the reports they did was specific to number of COVID-19 cases in meat processing plants. And Pennsylvania ranked #1 in the country for the total, bless you, Jennifer, for the total number of cases in meat plants. And it caused our senators, appreciate all their work, Pat Toomey, Bob Casey, to really question what's happening in our state and region. The problem with that data, as you looked at it, was we were spreading all our cases over about 26 plants that were actually doing reporting as they were supposed to be. And one of our poultry processors on the east side of the state got their hands slapped because they were slow to do some of their reporting. But they were trying to do their due diligence and not report false positives. Okay. So once that all got hammered out, if you really looked at, for instance, South Dakota versus Pennsylvania, if you go look up that report, I can send that to Erica too for any of you that are interested in looking at it. But the state of South Dakota was reporting 2 plants and had 10 less cases than Pennsylvania, versus our 26 plants that were actually reporting numbers appropriately to the CDC as was required at that time. So I don't think that the message was appropriately packaged, right? Certainly just by, that's like measuring 2 things and one was positive and one was negative and say, we have a 50% case rate. That's not good science. So stats like that and headlines like that bother me as a scientist, but I understand that politics gets involved in some of that. Having said that, with all of the large plants that I work with on a regular basis and have talked to and have relationships with, the amount of dollars that they've spent to try to protect their employees, to separate their employees, and keep their employees, whether it was fear of getting ill, fear of spreading something to their families, or just being comfortable in getting a $2,400 a month check for doing nothing, all of that played into the causing in some ways more harm than good. And so a lot of those folks were, they were even adding $2, $3, $4 per hour hazard pay, if you will, overtime to their employees to try to incentivize to keep them. Luckily, our second biggest beef plant in the state did not shut down. Otherwise, that would have been disastrous for Pennsylvania if both had shut down at the same time for multiple weeks. My real answer to you, Bill, is I don't know. My hope is that the people that I've talked to, they've done a much better job at how they're screening employees, how they're encouraging and sending that message to, if you are sick, don't come to work.
I kind of understand what you're saying there, Jonathan, but earlier you made the statement that, the restaurants were closed and a lot of this stuff was going into freezers.
Yep.
But the product wasn't available to the market.
It wasn't available because, so that's a different question than have we learned anything. Has that one-way street to export and food service turned 100? Have they retooled it? The answer to that is 90% no. Certainly it has brought awareness to the fact, but I don't see that as being a two-way street right now. But that better be something that we're working on in the future, now that we're a little more comfortable, I guess you could say, in how we're managing screening employees, slowdowns, when plants shutter and drop below, say, 70% or 60% capacity, how they're dealing with that. But the fact that product, again, it's the same issue that if you had a harvest floor, Bill, it's the same issue that you would have with all the coolers and all the carcasses in your cooler. They don't want to have thousands of carcasses in a cooler when a 40% work capacity shows up. And so having said that, I don't think we're at the point where we can say confidently that is fully a two-way street. In other words, it can come out of cold storage and go into a facility like yours where it can be put into retail. It's going to be going through some other specialty steak service still, some independent, I guess, third party that's going to have to take whole trailer loads of this product to be able to offload it, which is what happened. And I'd like to say that is solved, but I can't confidently say that, Bill. So,
thank you, Jonathan.
Does anyone else have anything that's burning?
Yeah, I guess I was thinking about the conversation just now with respect to whether the problem is solved, and I agree none of us have an answer to that. But the one thing I will say is when companies like US Foods and Cisco are pinned into a corner like they were when the food service business was shut down, you can bet that they're working on figuring out how to get that meat direct to a consumer versus where the corner they were in just now.
Yeah, I did have them approach me, Cisco and US Foods, which supply the restaurants.
Yeah, a lot of it has to do with retooling how they, where they're going with those, who are cutting steaks for the restaurants, because they, I gave you a chain of Texas Roadhouse earlier, except for T-Bones, they cut all their own steaks in house, so they don't have to worry about anything less than a box of subprimals showing up at each facility within that distribution chain. That's the easy part. The hard part are the other chain restaurants that cut absolutely nothing in-house. So that's got to go somewhere to be further fabricated to go to the restaurant. And that's the piece that is probably the hardest in the whole equation, because if you put a whole sirloin top butt in a retail case, nobody know what to do with it. And sadly, if you took it to a big box store, they definitely wouldn't know what to do with it.
Does anyone else have any questions or maybe some insight into what's going on in your business? Challenges that you're currently working through? Dustin, anything in Mississippi?
There we go. Sorry, having issues. We had camera issues, so I'm stuck on an iPhone trying to hold it up this whole time. Mississippi still it's coming back. It's a little slow. Our processing has done nothing but get busier. We also have a restaurant here which is still struggling to get momentum. It is coming back. That's one thing that's hurt us on the processing is we process a lot for restaurants. We do boxed beef, pork, etc. With a lot of specialty products, either pre-cut steaks or fabricated sausages, and we don't do much many whole muscle cuts other than just a few steaks here and there. It's mostly as one I'm saying, an iPhone is a little rough here, but it's coming. It's getting a lot better than it was. Shipping has been something we're trying to get into. We've tried several different ways, and some of you might have an input on that as far as just the shipping costs associated with some of these perishable products. you move that on to the consumer, and I mean, they've on our end, they'll buy $75 worth of sausage and have a $150 freight bill. So we're in a pinch trying to either mark the sausage or steaks up, over double the markup, or add on a shipping. I don't know if anybody has any other input on shipping or some sort of packaging for a longer transit time.
Yeah, Dustin, good point. They American Association of Meat Processors, if you are a member, which I know you are, they actually have a group rate for I believe it's UPS, it might be FedEx.
Yeah, it's UPS. There's a little break there. But we've reached out to UPS, with a commercial account directly and got a little better rate. And it depends on the where in the U.S. it's going. Even in we had a few boxes that went out this last week for next day air, and they showed up 2 days later. UPS said, "Well, sorry, we can't guarantee anything right now." So we're stuck. The customer pays $300 to ship something next day air and don't get it for 2 to 3 days. Then, of course, it makes us look like the bad guy, but it's, we're at the mercy of UPS.
Yeah.
Sean.
But other than the shipping, it's going. We're doing a lot of mostly packages. We do a lot of custom processing, and whenever all this kicked off, we started making some freezer bundles or freezer boxes, ground beef, steaks, a few different options, and we're prepared to send out 25 to 30 the first week, and just from a Facebook post, by midnight that night we had 250 sold.
Wow.
So I'm like, oh no, it's like deer season all over again. So it was pull everybody back in for all night shifts. I'm like, what is this? We sold more ground beef tonight than we have in the past 3 months. And luckily, since we do have a restaurant here, we're able to pull directly from Cisco, was able to provide us with a lot of, prepackaged ground and steaks, which they had a surplus of, versus some of their grocery suppliers were out of stock completely.
Right.
So they were able to help us quite a bit on some extremely cheap restaurant cuts. A lot of, like I know Jonathan mentioned earlier, we were able to get prime briskets for like $2.70 a pound there for a while.
It was crazy.
Which is unheard of, so it's definitely
Especially
been a
right in the middle
challenge.
of barbecue season. But
Yeah,
that's why those barbecue restaurants weren't open. Those competitions that occur all over the country that are sanctioned by the Kansas City Barbecue Society did not occur. So they had to go somewhere.
yeah, but it's been a change. We've tried to adapt to as much of that as we can. Buffets being closed gave us a lot of options for. You get like in cut from these packing houses. You got in cut and miscut ribeyes that people use for buffet steaks, and they're just dirt cheap. And we used and just started a line of ribeye burgers. Several flavored ribeye burgers, and we just grind ends and pieces of ribeye, which in April were $2.50 a pound for choice ribeye ends when ground chuck was $7.50. So we just work with what we had.
Yeah, and that just confirms the fact that there's not a meat shortage. There's a supply chain issue.
Exactly.
There's a transportation issue. Is the UPS issue people are shipping more stuff, or is it because they're now shopping from home, and that increases? Is it the fact that they're having employee problems? And my guess is it's a multi-function equation that's very hard to say. It's not any one of those things, but all of them having a very big impact nationwide and I guess worldwide too. But maybe you guys can get on Amazon or something, because perhaps they can guarantee everything shipped on a certain time frame.
Yeah.
They're buying grocery chains now too, right?
Yeah, I think the direct shipping directly, to the consumer's household will be big change that's here to stay, I believe.
Yeah.
Well, I can't believe it's already 7:30 at this point. I know we didn't get through a lot of maybe your questions that you guys had. I want to thank you all, first of all, for joining us tonight. I hope that you felt that this was a well worth your time opportunity to network and connect with everybody, especially from varying backgrounds. And I know we had processors on here, beef producers, and so I just thought that this was a really great platform, especially now that we're, you know, all kind of forced to stay in our homes and can't socially interact. For me, that's hard. But I'm just glad that we were all able to get on tonight. There will be a survey following this that I would love for everybody to fill out and just kind of give some feedback. I mean, I'm willing to take any kind of feedback going forward, and we can just kind of see what you guys are looking forward to. If there's more of this that you would like to see, and we like to see this into a series and maybe more specific topics, we can definitely talk about that. And yeah, I'd love to get your feedback on that. I did just ship out everyone's boxes today, so you should be getting those within the next couple days, from now until probably next week. I think the latest for folks up in the New England part, you'll look at your boxes getting there around the 8th or 9th due to the holiday weekend. But we'd love to get your pictures of, you know, your boxes and you opening them. You can send them to my email, but I'd love to just kind of see what you guys think of them. But with that, we'd like to thank you for coming. And if you have any questions, any kind of information that you thought you wanted to get from Dr. Campbell, like he said, he'll send me that information, or I can link you up with him later after tonight's call. And if you have any other questions that you didn't feel like got answered, I can definitely direct those questions to either Rob or Dr. Campbell, and we can get you connected. So thank you, everyone.
Thank
Have a
you.
good night.
Thanks.